Hello and welcome everyone to the Armenian News Network Groong Week in Review for April 27, 2025. Today we're talking with Ms. Dziunik Aghajanian, a former ambassador of Armenia to many countries and a diplomat. Welcome back, Ambassador. Glad to have you on the show again.
Good evening. Thank you.
Hello, Dziunik.
Hi, Hovik.
Given that this is the week after April 24, let's cover the events that transpired last week in terms of the Armenian Genocide Remembrance Day. So Armenians in Armenia and across the diaspora marked April 24th with marches, flowers, and candles. This is a traditional, activity. But for many, it's not just a memorial lately. It's a reminder that justice has not come, and new fresh wounds are appearing every time. In 2023, Armenians were expelled or ethnically cleansed from Artsakh. Many see this as a continuation of the same crime. It happened with the same goal to erase a people, and still no justice. This year, the silence grew louder because for the first time since independence, Armenia's leadership, or de facto leadership, said that genocide recognition is no longer a state priority. To add insult to injury, he made that statement in March in front of Turkish media. Back in 2018, after the coup, trust was still high, and he spoke about remembrance and justice. And even in his speeches in 2020, for instance, he was talking ardently about the need to remember and demand justice. That was the official slogan of the Armenian Genocide commemoration. And today that promise is gone, of course. Dziunik, what are the implications of Armenia deprioritizing the genocide issue at a state level, both domestically and in foreign policy?
We have to understand that this whole process is dictated by the desire to, I'll call, normalize relations with Turkey, to have any relations with Turkey, to establish diplomatic relations, mutual recognition of states, etc. But we have to understand that the nature of the Turkish state and its policies carried out throughout more than a century, and especially during the last 30 years and the last episode that we had with regards to Nagorno-Karabakh, shows that in actuality there is no change in the perception and approach towards Armenians, and the only desire that the Turkish ruling elites have, the same way as the Turkish Ottoman ruling elite had in 1914, 15, and up to 1923, when we had the last episode of genocide elections in Turkish, already in modern Turkey, is simply to erase any Armenian footprint and Armenian element from this region, and to have it under its full total control, including with the exemption of the Armenian population from the region as much as possible. We saw the same policy carried out in Artsakh, and you mentioned expulsion. It was not expulsion, it was ethnic cleansing, and it is part of the genocide election carried out by Azerbaijan. And according to the Genocide Convention, both the blockade, the Azerbaijani leadership's actions before that, during the blockade, and after are part and parcel of the definition of genocide according to the convention. So we have to call it the way it is legally inscribed in the international documents. It was genocide of Armenians of Artsakh, and that was continuation of the same policy that we have seen during the beginning of the 20th century. And continued at the end of the 20th century in Nagorno-Karabakh, and later on we saw the same handwriting being used and implemented.
And you sort of answered my question before I had a chance to say it, but how appropriate is it to say that it is a continuation of the Armenian genocide that started in 1915, people will say, well, that happened 100 years ago. Is that a loose connection? Or, what can you tell us about that and in your thoughts?
No, it's not a loose connection. And I think the genocide scholars have explained the full chain of definition of the crime of genocide. And the last stage of it is the refusal, despite the fact that already in 1923, where the Turkish Republic, the current Turkish Republic, was established, there were still genocidal actions being carried out against Armenians in that territory. Also, after that, the Islamatization of the remaining Armenian population, change of their ethnic belonging, erasure of the Armenian cultural heritage, and the main issue, refusal of acceptance of the genocidal actions having carried out by the Ottoman government, despite the tribunal in 1919 that already condemned and gave the definition of the crime against humanity and passed the sentence against the perpetrators. All these policies that were carried out afterwards, especially with the current leadership of Turkey, that is going against the rejectionism and revision of history and trying to blame the victims for the crime that the leadership has committed, with the purpose of simply getting the territory without its population. It's a population that has been living there for thousands and thousands of years before even the element of Turkishness appeared on that territory and showed any political legitimacy to exist as a political entity. So we have to see the same handwriting done in a different way. Also, we see the political expediency of the so-called civilized world having the same impact in the beginning of the 20th century when the Armenian genocide was being committed. The political expediency did not allow the main powers at the time to stop it from occurring, and some were part and parcel of the charting of the genocide. The same we saw during the Artsakh genocide, that so-called Western world that was trumpeting about human rights and security and protection of all the democratic values, etc., simply kept silent and signed to the plan that had much further going purposes, simply to achieve their political advantages that were put there, and to which Artsakh and Armenians were brought as scapegoats for the implementation of those plans.
How do you think this might be perceived in the diaspora? We know that genocide is especially sensitive topic in the diaspora because the diaspora is a byproduct of the genocide in many ways. We already seen what happened in Artsakh, and there's always dissatisfaction with, I would say not dissatisfaction, but outright rejection of Pashinyan's policies. But this time he's basically telling, all the diasporans that, what, Armenia is no longer gonna fight for the recognition of the crime that
that's not
killed
right.
your
That's
ancestors.
not correct. That's not correct, because the population does not agree with the purposes and the plans of the people sitting in the governing positions. And I would not separate the outrage in Armenia from the outrage in diaspora. And the same way as diaspora, as the majority of diaspora is the result of the genocide, the same is the population in Armenia. You can hardly find any family that doesn't have a survivor in its family tree. So I wouldn't put any difference between the Armenians in Armenia and the Armenians in diaspora. The same feelings, the same outrage is there, and the march on April 23, the number of people there, the march on April 24 to the genocide memorial showed that the people stand there, and despite the fact that its leadership wants it to forget about this crime and brings up very obscure phrases to describe it in their statements, the people of Armenia stand there and say, we remember, we demand, and we reject all these policies. So unlike the other years when the government and the people were acting as one together with diaspora Armenians, now the people in Armenia, the diaspora Armenians, are acting as one against the government of Armenia that is satisfying the Turkish demands and trying to go in line with the rejectionist and revisionist policy that is being carried out, with the hope that at the end of the day, they will have some economic benefits coming out from the so-called peace agreement or whatever it is with Azerbaijan and the open borders with Turkey. That's not going to happen.
I tend to agree with you. I mean, how much daylight is there between you and me, a diasporan and a Republic Armenian, Hovik, in our outrage about the genocide and how we feel about the genocide?
Not about the genocide, but if you ask many Armenians in the diaspora, genocide is one of the predominant part of their identity.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Armenians in Armenia, are citizens of the state and may have more opinions on other topics. That's what I was trying to refer to. But yes, I think
that's natural. I mean, people in different countries have their own issues and concerns, their own everyday life and with their own problems, and they deal with that. But when you come to overarching national issues, identity issues, genocide and homeland, and the desire for justice to be eventually prevailing, I don't think it's different among the majority, the overwhelming majority of Armenians, no matter in what country they live and under which conditions they live, whether they are one of the richest people in the world or whether they are just struggling to survive their daily life. It doesn't matter, because it's part of existence. It's part of our, it was injustice done not only by perpetrating the plan to kill a whole nation, but also taking your homeland, making you homeless, and the same policy continues today. And the outrage is also against the government of Armenia, because it does not want to recognize that its own actions are fueling the current insecurity against the Armenian population in Armenia, and fueling the Turkish and Azerbaijani desires to gain more and more by actually forcing them, under the pretext of normalization of relations or achieving peace in the region, to actually give up as much as possible, and by that making Armenia powerless and the Armenian population's security at risk up to the point of non-existence. So this is a very dangerous path that they are following, but they are following under the Western guidance, as I explained, that kept silence out of political expediency, and they were part and parcel of the plan of giving Artsakh to Azerbaijan in return for certain commitments that Azerbaijan has and yet has to fulfill.
Yeah, and they're also, let me just add, they are also adding to the insecurity of diaspora Armenians, not only the people in Armenia. Just witness, for example, a few days ago when there was a movie about Artsakh that was going to be shown at UC Berkeley, and under Azeri pressure or Turkish pressure, it was canceled. I mean, they are emboldened by the weakness of the Armenian state and the passive stance.
I think the diaspora organizations have to go back to the way of operation before the independence of Armenia. So during the independence time, there was this connected action, and the national issues were perceived as one. The way of pursuing it was different, but the ultimate goal was one, and the diaspora kind of was less stressed, knowing that they are not alone in their struggle. Now that we have to fight, Armenians in Armenia have to fight against their own government. Diaspora Armenians have to remember the way they were acting before the independence of Armenia and stop feeling themselves powerless. They are not powerless. The Turkish, the Azeri, and certain countries want them to feel powerless, because one of the purposes of the Turkish government is also to kill the Armenian lobby, to make it as useless as possible. But that's not going to happen if the Armenian organizations realize that they have different leverages over the governments of the countries, the citizens of which they are, and to which prosperity they have contributed tremendously, and they are doing it now as well as loyal citizens of those countries. So I think the only perception that the current diasporan thinking has to have is they have to act as they are alone in their fight, but not lonely in their fight. They're just alone in their fight, because Armenians in Armenia are also fighting for the same goal and purpose. So at the end of the day, we'll unite our efforts. But for that, we need to change the government here. Meantime, the organizations in the diaspora have to regain their grounds and start acting and demanding not only punishment for the crime of genocide and not going back to their wordings of 10, 20 years ago, but also punishment for the crime of genocide that Azerbaijan committed. And that will ensure the rights of the Artsakhi Armenians for collective return under international guarantees according to the international law. That's something that many people tend to forget, and the government of Armenia currently wants the Armenian population in Armenia to forget it as well. But that's not going to happen.
And just to close this topic off, because my question, of course, was rhetorical. Just, the proof is in the pudding in terms of the connection between the events 100 years ago and continuously happening. When Erdogan was in Baku in the military parade celebrating the war,
the so-called victory,
temporary victory, and so-called victory. He said the spirit of Enver Pasha is now at peace. Enver Pasha is one of the architects of the Armenian Genocide, and world leaders.
Just in case you were missing the link between the genocide and Artsakh.
Yeah,
no, it also shows
don't take it from us. Take it from Erdogan.
It also shows that no matter how much the civilized world is trying to persuade us that Turkey has changed or the Turkish people have changed, the expressions that you mentioned, together with the actions that they carry out on an everyday basis, show that the mentality and the purposes have not changed. And it will take, I don't know how many centuries for this kind of mentality to change into normal human understanding of coexistence and neighborly relations. That's a no-no, and that's a concept that is simply non-existent in Turkish political establishment.
Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about the commemorative statements we heard from some of the major geopolitical players in the world. The genocide is fully affirmed in the United States in words. The Congress affirmed in 2019 in a near unanimous vote, as did the Reagan and Biden White House administrations. However, in policy, almost nothing has changed. It remains fully legal and fruitful to lobby U.S. officials to lie, to deny, to promote revisionist activities in the genocide, as I mentioned just recently between Azerbaijan and UC Berkeley. So it's no surprise that Armenians every year look to each president to affirm the record. And this year, Trump failed to do so. Meanwhile, the
Which
EU
was expectable.
Oh, it was expected, but we looked to them to do the right thing, and Trump failed. Let's just be very clear about that. Meanwhile, the EU mission in Armenia, which is a representative of the EU
The
in Armenia,
binoculars.
posted an announcement and then censored it by removing the term Armenian genocide from it. This was even worse. This was amazing because it clearly evidenced the thought process from discussing the truth to final censorship for political reasons. I mean, it was in full display. And let me mention, we're putting the links in the notes for everyone, podcast.groong.org/episode number. There will be links to some of these things. For example, how they censored it. We tweeted about this between the uncensored version and the censored version. So go check that out.
Yeah. So, but just to sort
Full
of
hypocrisy on display.
they essentially removed the word Armenian genocide and instead said the events from 1915 to 1923.
There were several signs that we have to be very worried about. And I think this is a message that also the diaspora organizations have to carry into their political fight for justice. And that's part of the rejectionist policy that we see being carried out. First, the EU mission statement that you just mentioned. It was a testimony to the political expediency that I spoke about, and also to the fact that the West, the so-called West, is co-organizer of this whole mess that was created in South Caucasus.
Mm-hmm.
And they are still following the plan that they have charted initially, and they have become a co-organizer of the genocide of Armenians in Artsakh. So this is something that they just stamped on it by this particular small action that they did. The second thing that they tried to kind of reshape the Armenian mind and the international community's mind by simply presenting it as something that happened there in certain period of time out of nowhere. Nobody did anything, it just happened, and we have just to mourn the victims. Who planned it? What was the crime? No mentioning of it. So this is also part and parcel of the revisionist policy of Turkey that is trying to rewrite history to show as if people simply died during the World War I, and that was not state-planned action that resulted in annihilation of a whole ethnic group from its ancestral homeland.
A nation.
And the third thing, just a nation from its homeland. And the third thing that we saw in the statement, the same with the, if I'm not mistaken, Trump's statement, the same with our so-called prime minister's statement, and we saw that there's no mentioning of Turkey. It is just, if they mention anything, they say Ottoman Empire, as if it is something vague somewhere. It existed, it doesn't exist anymore, and nothing else. So it stopped there, and we don't have to remember it. And the fourth that we have to see, there were no statements from European countries, leaders, which is unusual.
Well, usually, I do want to mention that Emmanuel Macron actually did make statements.
Well, he has elections coming, so let's forget France. France is non-representative in this case.
Mm-hmm.
The European Union leadership said zero about Armenian genocide, 110th commemoration. So it was something that they pursue in the same line, appeasing Turkey because they still have plans with Turkey. They have plans with Turkey strengthening Israel in Middle East. They have plans with Turkey vis-a-vis Iran action, and they still have plans with Turkey against Russia. All these plans are still valid and being pursued by the Western governments, even the Trump administration. They are showing as if they are willing to negotiate with Russia a proper peace, but that's not the thing they are pursuing. They just need temporary cessation of the fire that will give them enough time to bring back their military-industrial complex and bring back the economy, to put them into their feet so that they can start the process again. So this is what they are doing. And Armenia has become victim, and the Armenian people have become victim to these global neo-colonial plans that somehow out of nowhere just were poured on us, and the population was simply naively believing that there is some kind of a civilized world with democratic values and we have to become part of it. I don't want that kind of a world that is just putting my people as sacrificial material on their table without even giving a care what will happen to these people and the 1,000 years of heritage that it created.
It's important to note that both in the US and Europe, there is a split between the people and the governments, because if you look at EU parliamentarians, you will see dozens of parliamentarians who actually made statements. The point that I was trying to make and remains valid is that there's no policy that supports these good statements. And unfortunately, Pashinyan is the kind of leader who's running after statements, does not necessarily need anything that really supports Armenia materially.
You know, there are really very few parliamentarians that truly believe and follow the cause. The rest are following the Western line of playing this game of parliamentarians being used as a pressure leverage over Turkey and Azerbaijan, whereas the executive branch is doing nothing and just appeasing them with the hope that eventually they will follow their initial plan. But that's I think both Turkey and Azerbaijan, we have an Armenian saying, they have counted their teeth. They know exactly what they are doing, and they are playing very well with this scheme of demanding more and more from Armenia, from the Western governments, and the Western governments are pressurizing our whatever leadership we have there to give up as much as possible in order for their initial plans vis-a-vis Iran and Russia could go forward and eventually have some success in that. But again, we see that's not happening. Regretfully, we are losing on every passing day. We are just having no success in removing these people from their positions for the sake of Armenia's survival.
Erdogan offered condolences to the Armenian community in Turkey. Apparently, he still feels the pain in his heart for the lives lost during the events when his ancestors tore terrorist babies from their Armenian mothers' wombs, threw the Armenian women from cliffs, drowned entire Armenian families in the Black Sea, and marched them through deserts and assimilated the very young into Muslim families. The Russian embassy in Armenia made a clear statement in line with its official recognition that was in 1995. As I mentioned, same with Emmanuel Macron. Now, China has not officially recognized the Armenian genocide and has never made a specific statement on the issue in the past, as far as I know. Its stance is largely in line with its relationship with Turkey. And for all the hype about warm relations with India, growing defense cooperation, and so on, once again, India has not recognized the Armenian genocide. Not sure why. Apparently, there is some motion on that front, but here's a large country with strong relations with Armenia, but has not recognized it. Nor has Australia, and nor has the UK. So here are some major international players that have to do a little bit of political and soul searching in the coming years. Dziunik, what are your thoughts about these world reactions?
Well, Erdogan's statement, as I said, was expectable. It's going back on its word. The most advanced in somehow remorse, feeling a remorse, was in 2015 for the 100th anniversary. And as we had this government that is following the Turkish agenda, they went back into their initial way of referring to the Armenian genocide. So there is nothing to discuss there. With respect to Australia and Britain, Australia is part of the same Western group, and I think it's very much reliant on whatever it's being told by the leaders of the Western camp. As for the British, I think they still have to open their archives and come out with the truth about their participation in the whole plan.
They can't find the archives.
Really, it's very strange. They can find anything, but not the archives, and they still have to come out with the exact truth about their role and participation in the whole event. So I'm not surprised, and also given the fact that the British are working with Turkey very close in the plan for the recharting of the Middle East and South Caucasus and going beyond to Central Asia, and for the destruction of Russia and Iran on the way. So I'm not surprised. As for China and India, honestly, I think the main purpose of both the diaspora organizations and Armenian government was focused on European countries, because first, Turkey was inclined to become a member of European Union, so it was part of this democratization process that could be presented from the Western side, and also because most of our diaspora organizations were lobbies were strong enough in European and countries and North America. So I think once we recover our strength, we will definitely focus on the genocide recognition all over the world, including the rising powers that were not considered as such previously. But also we have to think about our heritage in those countries, because the Armenian communities there were pretty strong in past centuries and have left remarkable footprint in those countries and in the advancement of those countries, both in cultural and economic terms. So we have to work towards it, but that's in coming years.
Hovik, thoughts you want to share?
Well, the obvious thought is that the interests of the Armenian nation strongly rely on the strength of the Armenian state. We had a strong state before, the world paid attention, and it was able to defend the interests of the Armenian people. A weak state, a traitorous leadership brings different results. The other thing is, when we're talking about the UMA, the double talk from UMA about how they censored their own statement.
Maybe it would have been better if they said nothing than whatever they did.
Exactly. I mean, they could have just deleted the statement.
Yeah, because nobody was expecting a statement from them. If they are trying to show themselves as some kind of a leading body in Armenia or in the Armenian diplomatic circles, nobody in Armenia, in the population, perceives them as such. So they could have kept silent and done their job of binocular securing of Armenians' borders. Armenians expected statement from the leaders of European Union, one of which is actually planned to visit Baku on the exact April 24 day. So that was, yes, that was a show of real intention rather than the hypocrisy, as you mentioned, that we have seen for many years from the Europeans, which were trying to drag us towards Europe and away from Russia with certain promises that never actually materialize.
I just want to add one more thing, because in the absence of official state events, the Jaherovirt, or the candlelight procession, was the main event. And why I want to talk about this is because there was a flag burning at the end of the procession, the burning of a Turkish and Azerbaijani flags. And immediately government-affiliated people and media started spreading the thesis that Azerbaijanis were shooting at the border because of this flag burning. So, but I must be losing my mind because I thought Azerbaijanis were shooting at our border for almost 2 months now,
For
nonstop.
almost 5 years now.
Well, even 5 years, but maybe I'm wrong, Dziunik. So correct me and also tell me, is it, in all seriousness, what is the reason why the Armenian government is linking the shooting on the border, which has been happening for 2 months at least nonstop, the latest instance of it, with the burning of flags?
You have to understand this in the context of so-called fear for war, and that they are trying to present that if they do something that either Azerbaijan or Turkey will not like, then we will have military actions on our borders. And that fear, instilling this fear in the population to justify their concessions and actions that they are taking against Armenia's interest and Armenia's security and territorial integrity. It has to be perceived in the same line. So whenever there is a statement to be made in the parliament criticizing the Turkish rejectionist policy or even criminalizing the rejection or degrading of the Armenian genocide, it is being presented as if it will ruin all their efforts to come to normalization of relations with Turkey. But we have to understand it in the right context. It is simply the promises that this ruling party or whatever has made to their masters in Turkey and Azerbaijan, and they are simply following their lead. That's as simple as such. So we have to perceive it in the same context. As for the burning of the flags, it's a normal demonstration act perceived in even democratic countries. So all this justification of internationally recognized states somehow flags have immunity against burning does not exist in the world. If it is an enemy flag, if the country has done the wrong to you or your people have the right to show their disagreement in whatever way they want, as far as it doesn't endanger the security, the internal security of the country. I don't think the burning of Turkish or Azerbaijani flags somehow endangered the security of even the people that were around this action.
Speaking of burning flags, I think I'm also suffering from mental decline because I could remember at least probably around 10 years ago when the same team, Pashinyan and his cronies, were burning the Russian flag in front of the Russian embassy. Maybe I'm just imagining things, but I thought
the video material is there. People have brought it out.
Okay.
Brought it out.
So the country. So let me get it straight. The country that is supposed to guarantee Armenia's security, you're going to burn their flags, and that's somehow okay. But the country that has genocided Armenians, you're not supposed to say anything about it. Okay, understood.
Current policies.
Okay, we are recording this show on Tuesday, April 29. And since yesterday, Iran's president, Masoud Pezeshkian, and a large delegation of 120 people have been in Baku for bilateral discussions between Iran and Azerbaijan. We know that Azerbaijan's transit demands through Armenia and Iran's alternatives for it have been major key items on their agenda. And Dziunik, I know that it's a little early to discuss outcomes from these meetings, but do you have any preliminary impressions, expectations? What are your thoughts about this bilateral discussion between the two countries?
Well, from what I have read, they didn't sign any document that was of ultimate value, unlike the strategic partnership agreement that Iran had with Russia and which President Putin signed into action just, I think it was 2 days ago, something like that. But we have to see this whole process in line with the policy that both Iran and Russia are carrying out for already more than 4 years after 44-day war in Artsakh. And the main purpose is not to allow any kind of military instability in the region, which will turn it into a second front for both Russia and Iran. So they are coming up with positive steps, constructive ideas, the diplomatic format to discuss issues, negotiations, etc., to drag the process so that the international development and the whole atmosphere and the whole situation will change, not kind of making the opening of a second front not necessary anymore. So they will kind of overcome this very dangerous phase in their history and in our history, because Armenia is being used for that purpose, in order not to allow any kind of military development in the region. That's why Russia kind of swallowed all the disrespectful actions that were coming out both from the Azerbaijani government and the Armenian government in Nagorno-Karabakh, even to the extent of allowing the depopulation of Artsakh, simply not to allow the second front to be opened in our region, which will simply blow up the whole area and the peripheries of both Russia and Iran. So we have to view this in this context. They are doing everything to keep it as quiet and as manageable as possible as of now, until we have some clarity with respect to US, European countries, China, India issues, so that this whole thing will calm down a little bit, making it more manageable, and hopefully the change of government in Armenia that will kind of bring the breath of relief, eventually knowing that they don't have to worry about knife being dragged into their backs from a neighbor that previously was considered a very trustworthy one.
It's interesting that you say that, because at every turn, Pezeshkian has been asserting that the sovereignty of each country must not be violated. In fact, he threw a bone to Azerbaijan by saying, I think that Nagorno-Karabakh is an inalienable part of Azerbaijan, and they've been bandying that in their press. Meanwhile, he is sort of saying to the Armenian government, stop giving up your own sovereignty. You might think that he's just talking to the Azerbaijanis, but I think he's actually talking to Armenia, saying, stop giving up your sovereignty and maintain your borders.
Yeah, because we have to be honest that the fact that Dziunik is still intact and with the Republic of Armenia is mainly due to the persistent political stance of Iran that said no changes of any historical borders.
Right.
And no changes. Iran did not do it for Armenia. Iran did it for itself to serve its own country's interests, but that coincides with the interests of the Armenian people. But that does not coincide with the promises of the Armenian government. So I think Pezeshkian was very, as usual, as with the Iranian leaders and politicians, smartly putting finger on the painful points and saying exactly what the Iranian stance is, which is to the benefit of stability and actual prosperity of the South Caucasus. So we have to be very clear that Iran is doing everything that it wouldn't do maybe some 7-8 years ago even, but I think they came to the realization, both Iran and Russia came to the realization that a strong Armenia is a security guarantee also for their own countries,
for
because
Iran.
then it becomes the backbone of not allowing any destabilizing plans to be implemented, and that becomes the joining, the juncture of communication and the juncture of security. That was not the perception we had before. Our enemies know our strength very well, our power very well, and that's why they did everything to bring a group to power in Armenia that will serve their own interests rather than the Armenian nation's interest. I think once we overcome this situation, once Armenia is back to a political elite that is serving the nation's and the country's interests, then we can say that we actually re-evaluated Armenia's role not only in the region but also in the world, because once the the strong tree became fragile, then the whole situation in the region and in the neighboring regions started to fall apart, and that brought further dangerous developments, and we see the same developments going up until India and China, and we will see it also in the coming months.
Okay, glad you mentioned China. Last week, Aliyev was in China and he signed a pretty significant comprehensive strategic partnership with the Chinese. How will this influence the geopolitics of the region, especially in light of the relations between Iran and China and the whole BRICS and Road Initiative?
Well, Aliyev knows that its oil resources are not endless. Actually, they are coming to its final stage, and it has to do something to keep the country going economically and financially. That's why they are trying to become a communication hub, not only for the Silk Road that China is pursuing, but also for the European communication lines. As for China, China works in line with its own policy of economic cooperation turning into intangible links that would not allow the country to work against China. So I think it's expanding its power through different kind of economic ties, and that has been successful up until now, and that's what makes the US mad about China. I think this is something that we have to keep in mind, but Azerbaijan is as landlocked as Armenia is. So Azerbaijan can do nothing if Armenia and Georgia do not help Azerbaijan. So eventually there will be a point when Azerbaijan has to realize that aggressive policies are no way of keeping the country going, and they have to become more open to real normal international behavior rather than the kind of Middle Eastern territory gaining and genocide election policy being pursued. Up until now, they have been pursuing the policy of nation building on the basis of hatred against Armenia and actually appropriating whatever Armenian there is, both from the cultural point of view, even the churches, etc. They are trying to present as if it's theirs. I don't know where Azeri Islamic belief joined or connected with Armenian church. That is the first church the first Christian church in the world. It's still very unimaginable for me, but they are very keen on writing a history that never existed and trying to present the world with their rediscovered knowledge of history that nobody can testify to in the world.
Okay, Dziunik, we were talking about China and Iran, and on Saturday, a couple of massive blasts tore through the Shahid Rajeh port in Bandar Abbas in the south of Iran on the Indian Ocean, and this is a major hub, part of the INSTIC, International North-South Trade Corridor, and handles 80% of Iran's container traffic. I understand that it is also a major hub for shipping fuel to China. Obviously, there is no official explanation yet of what happened, but what are your thoughts about this incident and especially the timing of it?
I don't believe in coincidences. So especially in politics, they do not exist. And in the way the current Western countries, together with their Turkish puppet, are working, makes me to believe that this is no coincidence it is happening. It's not coincidence it is happening in the point it is happening, because as you mentioned, Bandar Abbas is a very crucial juncture point for all the transportation links going through Iran. It means strengthening Iran, a main hub for China for its fuel transportation, and also it is hurting Russia. It is also hurting India. So by having this kind of accident, so-called accident in Bandar Abbas, it's actually trying to weaken the negotiating stance in Iran and also with vis-a-vis China, and kind of make different kind of cracks in between their relations. But I think China, Iran, Russia, India are well aware of the patterns of behavior, and they know well where this kind of a blow could come. It makes me feel that it is the same handwriting as we saw in Beirut port. Remember some years ago, that actually became the last kick towards the Lebanese economy, from which Lebanon cannot recover up until now. And that was also the main point that economically hurt Hezbollah as one of the main powers in Lebanon. So I think we have to look at this whole picture as one, together with the sudden activization of the Kashmir conflict. So these things are no accidental, and these hotspots in certain places around the countries that are considered as rivals for the Western hegemony is something that we have to wait and see in the coming weeks and months as points of development. I have mentioned previously that we are entering a very dangerous timeline up until the middle of July. So we will see a lot of interesting development. But given the fact that none of these countries are naive anymore, they have seen these policies being played out previously. They know the results of these particular actions, and they know how to counteract to these plans. So we will see more diplomatic efforts being put there. If need be, this kind of a accident being presented as a technical issue rather than a terrorist act. So we will wait and see what is coming. But I know one thing: none of these countries would allow real military action being played out around their borders, on the peripheries of their borders, because they know that will be the trigger for the internal instability that the Western so-called NGOs and different kind of so-called democratic bodies have been put and input in these countries for the destabilization of the internal situation in those countries.
All right. Well, let's wrap up our topics here, and let me ask each of you if there's something more that you would like to share with our audience. Dziunik, do you have anything you'd like to share?
You know, the other day I remembered my feelings in 2017 when I came for vacation back to Armenia, and I was walking in the streets and looking at the eyes of our young people,
Mhm.
They were shining, and I was thinking, I'm so glad the sadness is gone from their eyes. So the new generation is growing with this shine in their eyes, and with the lack of sadness that we see mostly in the Armenian eyes, that are typical of Armenian eyes. I would say after the 44 war, and especially now when most of the population understands what has happened to them and how they have been manipulated into participating in this med aret for the country, the devastation that their own naive belief in good promises brought, and the deep sadness. It's like non-transparent, this kind of a very dark look into the eyes, and you would see that mostly when walking in the street. But the interesting thing was, when I was walking towards the genocide memorial, I saw one more thing in the eyes: the kind of will to fight. It is coming back to the people. And that's something that I'm happy to see, because it means we're overcoming this trauma that was being over and over again heated on everyday basis by our government. Now people are putting that aside, understanding why it is done, how it is done, and now they are kind of making an oath for struggle in their minds, in their behavior. And we saw that also supported by nature. Maybe it's mythological if I say, usually on the 24th of April, we have a very rainy day. But this time, it seemed like nature was encouraging people to go, because the rest of the week was very rainy. And that very day was very nice, not very hot, very nice. So people could go with their even young children to pay tribute to the memory of the genocide victims.
Hovik, thoughts?
Well, we just finished publishing our episode on the Vatican. I would encourage people to listen to that. And just right now, I was reading a statement from Ruben Vartanyan's team, who appealed to the Vatican to help, release of the Armenian prisoners in Baku. Some of them have been there for 5 years now, since the end of the 2020 war. The Armenian military leadership is there since the September 2023 events, the ethnic cleansing of Artsakh. And wouldn't it be a nice gesture, not complete atonement, but a nice gesture for someone in the Vatican to maybe give a call to the families of these people and make a public statement about it, given that they just participated in an event that helped whitewash Azerbaijan's crimes in 2023 and even before.
All right. Let's leave it there for today. Thank you, Ambassador Aghajanian. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was our weekend review, recorded on April 29, 2025. We've been talking with Ms. Dziunik Aghajanian, who has served Armenia through the ranks of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and most recently as a diplomat as Armenia's ambassador to such countries as the Netherlands, Malaysia, and Indonesia. She received her education at Yerevan State University, Columbia University, and Uppsala University in Sweden.
And before we go, we know that we have the best viewers that are on YouTube. So, and as such, it's not surprising that so many of you have donated to us by going to podcast.groong.org/donate. Thank you very much for doing that. And if you have a few dollars for a coffee, feel free to send that our way, because we need coffee to produce these shows. And if you don't have any funds, not to worry, because there are many other ways you can help us, such as liking, sharing, and commenting on our shows. And that all helps increase the engagement rates and get our shows in front of more eyes. So thank you for doing that as well.
Go to podcasts.groong.org/donate. And from there, you can find our Patreon page, our Buy Me a Coffee page, and you can give. And if you don't give, like Hovik said, just share, comment, and like our shows, retweet them, etc., etc. Thank you.
Or just write a mean comment on why you won't be able to do all those things.
Yeah, whatever comments you want. We read them, actually. All right. Talk to you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.